Cannabis Business Minds, we train and mentor professionals, entrepreneurs, and aspiring entrepreneurs on how to confidently find their place in the legal cannabis and hemp industries. Come on and join us at cannabisbusinessminds.com. Hello, Cannabis Business Minds. On this episode, we talk to a former Twitter, former Google, super involved in technology, Jeffrey Graham, the founder and CEO of Pistil, about how sales data and how sales and data in general can really help propel you in your cannabis business. Now, they have been working on their platform and their technology solutions for a few years and actually just rolled out a few more products, but their whole business is really about helping you as the business owner make more money. And that is through really being able to analyze what is happening with your data, with your customer data, also with your competitors' data, to get a clear understanding of what the market is, how pricing works, and also some very cool tools that they have to help business owners or those that are responsible for sales stay on top of your job in sales. It is so important, especially we know in cannabis, we don't have the opportunity to market the way traditional businesses do. So it's a really big sales effort. So if you are a cannabis operator or somebody supporting cannabis operators very interested in sales, this episode is going to be for you. Now, just a heads up, this was the day that Twitter was bought by Elon Musk, and actually the sale went through. And I didn't realize until after the interview that Jeffrey was a former Twitter. I mean, I realized it, but putting two and two together, that was actually a kind of hard day for Jeffrey. So I want to thank him again for being on the podcast and showing up and really adding a lot of value and insight about his journey as an entrepreneur in this space, but also as somebody that provided some really great insight on what you can be doing in your business to excel in sales. We also talked a little bit about social equity, which should always be a conversation in the cannabis industry. So I hope you enjoy it. Get your pad, get your paper. And if you have any questions at all about sales, I love to talk about it, especially with data. All right, take care, and I'll talk to you soon. I'm excited to hear about your story. I'm excited to hear about the technology that you've created and kind of what's in store. It just seems like, when did you get in this space?
About 3.5 years ago. So I was I was in the technology industry and just decided that cannabis would be a really interesting spot.
And was it because I'm thinking, so 3 years ago, it's a little bit after 2018 legalization, and you're in California, but California is 1996 for dispensaries. So you already have probably been very familiar with cannabis. I asked that question because it evolves so quickly and you're seeing data evolve so quickly. And I wanted just to understand, even just like as we start the podcast, to just kind of get your insight about the changes that you've been seeing in the marketplace. And before I kind of like hand it over, I asked that twofold. There's a West Coast. It's very different than the East Coast. And now you're in Canada, and that's probably very different than the US market in general. So, what have you seen from an expertise in the industry with the lens of what you're doing in these past 3 years?
Yeah, there are so many tailwinds and then headwinds at the same time. So it's like being in a bay and you're getting swirled around. And I think everybody feels like that in cannabis. Over the last 4 years, we went from a situation with tons of hope and opportunity and a lot of capital coming into the space, companies starting up with some great ideas. And a lot of them kind of ran into the reality of just how hard it is to operate in cannabis, to keep up with compliance and regulations, and just deal with the very complicated regulatory environment that's very contradictory. It's legal, it's not legal.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the cannabis industry is expanding state by state. and everybody sees that it's kind of inevitable and it's inexorable that this will become a nationally accepted industry. And I think that folks are getting more sophisticated in the way that they do business and the way that they use data. I think that the tough environment has forced people to use data to make difficult decisions or just just to simply sharpen up from an operational perspective. So, we're as an industry, we're growing, we're struggling, we're evolving, but I think to a place that's very clearly one where there'll be a lot more availability, and it'll just be a better world for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that being in it, especially you're in the heart of California, which that industry has seems like with the taxation, like you mentioned, regulation has almost like imploded and hopefully will change in a different way. But it's quite sad when you think about a lot of the operators that just couldn't be successful because of IRC 280, because of the regulation and all of that. And that's very different from, I am imagining, like Silicon Valley and not as much regulation when you think about the tech space.
But if I can
Yeah,
just jump in there, every industry has companies that fail, and in
yes.
fact, the more innovation that you have, the more you're going to have companies that start up and things don't work out. So, in a way, there are natural parallels to Silicon Valley in that
Mhm.
most companies in Silicon Valley don't end up becoming big, companies that survive. So I think that we have to accept that that
Mhm.
you try things and sometimes things don't work. I think the difference is you have the entire infrastructure of the U.S. economy helping if you're a technology startup,
Yeah.
but not helping if you're a cannabis startup.
Yeah, I think that was when I got in. The one thing it took me a while to understand, even as a CPA, just that without a lot of capital and support from that infrastructure, it is very hard
Mhm.
to be successful in that space. But you're right. Like, I think the stats are always kind of changing, but within 5 years, I think more than 80% of businesses will go out of business. And that's kind of as people jump into a space and they do their risk assessment of whatever industry that is,
Mhm.
it's something that is interesting. What parallels, I am curious, like what are the big parallels besides the one we were just talking about that you've seen from the tech space in the cannabis industry?
I think that what's really fun about the cannabis space, particularly working in data, but I'm sure it's like this everywhere, is that we're inventing the industry as we go. And so it's not applying the rules, applying the guidelines, applying the processes, learning those, and kind of uh, implementing what's already been the tracks that have already been laid, like it is in other industries. We're building those tracks, and that's a lot of fun. It's very creative, and I think that it can be like that in technology as well. People come up with new ideas, and they actually change the way that people live or do their business or interact. And that creativity and that innovation is rare in an industry that's so important and so big as cannabis. And I think that that's what really attracted me to it, is that there's a need, obviously, for there to be access and justice within cannabis, but also a need to create a whole industry from the ground up um, that will look like packaged goods to some extent. It will look like other industries. It will look like agriculture, but it will have its own characteristics. And I also think that what's really fun in a new industry like cannabis is I think that we're going to create ways of doing business that will be applied by other industries, that we're actually creating things not just for cannabis, but that will influence the way other people do their work in other industries as well.
I agree with you. I just think of the innovations that I've seen with clients or just talking to people in tech, but I'm even thinking of, some amazing people that are doing anti-racism training rooted in the cannabis industry. And that could be pertinent to banks, other industries, everything. And I agree with you. And that's actually very hopeful because so much of it is applying traditional business ideas into this space that had really just evolved without any of the formalities, I guess, of the corporate world. But I like that because there is this just unique dynamic energy and intelligence that comes from a lot of the people that are operating in this space, and to be able to be part of an industry that could actually influence other industries, because you're right, it touches on so much. Like I just thought, like, just even like traditional medicine and being able to like go down the rabbit hole of different options of how it can influence, and technology. Like I think when I was looking at your website and just looking at the testimonials, one of your customers was like, this is better than a solution that I've ever seen and I think he worked for like Anheuser-Busch or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like you're actually already experiencing that with some of the stuff that you're doing. And maybe, and I'm curious, like, as we kind of segue to this, is what had you previously designed or developed in tech that led you to finding, and not even finding, I guess, discovering what problem you wanted to solve in the cannabis space?
Yeah, I think that there were some generalities and then some specifics. So if you ask, how did we come up with the idea of Pistil? How did I come up with it with my background? I think in a general way, I've always been used to working with a lot of data. So I worked at Google, I worked at Twitter, worked at BlackRock, companies that are the whole enterprise is working with huge amounts of data, and it's woven into the way everything is valued and all decisions are made, and the way that value is exchanged. So the first thing when I got into cannabis, I felt that there wasn't enough data being used. And I thought there was a big opportunity there. So that's kind of from a general perspective. From a specific perspective, I also had worked with sales teams in helping them go to market. At Twitter, I built a team of researchers that helped the sales team express the value of Twitter, talk about the value of Twitter, talk about the audience. And I saw that in particular that in cannabis, the sales teams were really didn't have the tools to go to market that I saw in other industries that I'd been involved in. So that became our first product at Pistil, was a sales enablement tool that gave sales teams data about their local market, their territories at the store level, what's in stock, what's out of stock, what your competitors are doing, et cetera. I also think that as we build Pistil, I've worked for some companies that have, that have done really well, that have a lot of processes, a lot of systems. Mm-hmm. So I kind of feel like I know what things should look like. Mm-hmm. And that's helped me develop the vision of how Pistil should function as a company.
Yeah. How long was it before launching the first product? Because now it looks like you have 3 products. Mm-hmm. Was it stacked that way, how it shows up? Was it first sales, then brand, then dispensary, because of the data that you were able to get? Okay.
Yeah, I started when I was at NorCal Cannabis. I was head of business intelligence there and started developing the first product. I launched Pistil, and we brought our beta to market about 9 months later. And it was about a year of Pistil operating before we launched our general release product, and that's Pistil for Sales in California. And then about 6 weeks ago, we launched 2 tools for that are basically business intelligence tools. One for brands, which allows them to analyze what's happening in the markets that they operate in, and learn about competition and kind of hone their go-to-market. And then a tool for retailers to help them understand their local markets and their competition, and to benchmark their product assortment and their promotions and their pricing against what other options that consumers have in their areas.
I mean, it's incredible. Is the data coming from metric? Because I kept thinking, I was like, where's the data feed from? Like, is it
Yeah,
from, okay.
the data actually is, so we have data from 91% of retailers in the United States, in Canada. It's coming from publicly available sources. So it's
So,
coming primarily from e-commerce menus, which are uh, updated often in real time, but certainly daily, that are designed to give a very accurate, up-to-date view for the consumer about what's available, what the prices are, and you can see what's coming on the shelf and off the shelf and what's being promoted, et cetera. So we've developed technology that can look across all of those thousands of stores, bring that data in every day and analyze it, and help our clients understand what's going on, but what's changing day over day and week over week.
that's so cool because, like, from the micro, I just think about from a client perspective how interesting and how useful that would be, and to actually start making decisions based off of, like, oh, my competitors are not doing this, or they are doing this, and actually this pricing is going to need to change. I find that interesting. For example, like New York, I mean, it's just beginning. Like, there really aren't many like any, I don't think, legal sales. But when I was looking at the taxes that are going to be imposed, the taxes are based off of the milligrams of THC. And so it's very wonky. But then I thought, from a pricing perspective, that means that it's going to impact how brands and companies are pricing. And then adding on another layer of, well, there's the illicit market, and then how do you price for that? What pricing trends have you seen? And I'm also curious if that's something that you're also looking at as the CEO, because I know you've got a big vision to fill, a team to manage, and all of that. But what have you seen, if that's something that you're looking at?
Right. Broadly speaking, in the last 6 to 9 months in the United States, across the overall economy, we've seen inflation. Prices go up significantly, 8% year over year, every month. Uh, there's been the opposite trend in cannabis across most states. The cost of cannabis has gone down significantly by 5%, 8%. So that's really interesting that you have these two countervailing trends. Uh, a lot of that is to do with supply and demand. Um, and what's weird about the cannabis market, and unfortunate in many ways, is that the dynamics of supply and demand, which normally stabilize markets because they can kind of create an equilibrium, are really distorted in cannabis because you have limited licenses often for retailers. So demand is actually constrained, or you have too many licenses that are given out too fast. And so you have all these weird supply and demand constraints that make it really hard to predict and to really meet the consumer where they are in terms of what their price elasticity is. But overall, cannabis prices have come down, and that's hurt a lot of producers and manufacturers who are at the wholesale side are seeing prices really plummet.
Oh, but that's hard, because I'm like, well, I was trying to think of a positive spin on that. But have you noticed from branded products in general that maybe there's more of an affinity for a brand, that there is some more loyalty, if and I guess, yeah, loyalty to that product or that brand? Or is that something that you're not seeing?
I think that from what I observe and relative to the way the assumptions that we make about the cannabis market, in fact, brands are not particularly strong overall.
Mm-hmm.
That consumers are looking for value, particularly now that the economy is kind of distressed. People don't have a lot of money. Unlike during COVID, when a lot of people were collecting money and not having anywhere to spend it. Um, so, but even then, people are, most people don't have a lot of money lying around. There are a lot of people that live paycheck to paycheck. Cannabis is a product that's used across the entire economic spectrum. A lot of people rely on it for physical and emotional support.
Yeah.
So value is really, really important relative to strength, price, and quality. Uh, from a brand perspective, there are certainly some brands that have risen up to the top when we look at the data. Um, they tend to be, because there's no true national market, they tend to be products that can be sort of franchised out like gummies, and that can also deliver a very specific and consistent effect and results for people. Unlike flower, which has a lot of variability from strain to strain, from crop to crop, from season to season. So I think these are the things that are going on from the consumer perspective, looking for value, looking for consistency, and looking for the best, really the best deals. And that's driving a lot of the market. Without going on too long, you also have the black market in a lot of states, which is the alternative. And then you have this tax and regulatory situation, which kind of pads the price on the regulated side, which makes it hard to bring prices down because it's almost fixed in a lot of situations. So again, you have these constraints that make it really hard for the market to sort of respond and find the right equilibrium, because people are basically doing business with their hands tied behind their backs.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. I keep thinking about, like, we need people. I mean, you probably get involved in some form of lobbying, or like if you were ever part of like NCIA lobby days, but it's like these are the conversations that need to happen at a federal level now. So we can talk to people that can actually make a change to show what this industry could be, because I think that's the hard part of, you look at CAGR or you look at the growth, and then it's always changing year over year. And internally in the industry, I think we're well aware of it, but externally it's harder to show, like, hey, because we're almost in this, like you said, constrained environment where we really don't know what it would be like.
Yeah, I think countries that have taken a national approach and a reasoned national approach, like Canada and Germany, have thought about all of these issues. Germany certainly in creating their first set of guidelines. Canada now in reviewing its set of guidelines are thinking about all of these things, and trying to solve for access and safety and regulation and revenue, government revenue, and try to take all of those things at once. We don't really have that situation in our federal level in the United States. We don't really take that approach with our laws overall, but certainly not for something that's so political and fraught. You do see some states being increasingly responsive to the industry. California got rid of a specific tax at the cultivation level recently. Massachusetts actually today just relaxed its testing requirements that seemed to be basically overly done and would have made it basically unviable to bring any products to market. Actually, in New York, I'm sorry, not Massachusetts. Okay. So there's some responsiveness, but in the United States, we live in a regime where it's like basically like it's illegal. So if you want an industry, go at it, but don't expect a lot of help.
Yeah. Which we kind of all knew getting in, but I think like when you're in the trenches and you could see what the opportunity could be, it's a little frustrating. So how do you, knowing that's all what we got into, knowing that you have a big vision, and I'd love to hear what that big vision is, how do you go about each day mapping the strategy and just, continuing to move forward? I mean, it's very impressive. You just had like 2 product launches in the last 2 months. So how do you do it? And first, what's the big vision?
We want to help every cannabis business find opportunities to grow. I think that there's an opportunity really for every cannabis business to use data. And cannabis has a huge data problem. If you ask about data for most cannabis businesses, everybody's going to be like, this is a headache. It's a headache to deal with metric. It's a headache to deal with my POS data. It's a headache to integrate with an e-commerce platform. It's a headache to go to menus every day to just try to keep track of what's going on in the market. It's a headache to make the basic decisions easily that we should be making as a retailer or as a brand or as a sales team. So our vision is to help everybody make better decisions and help the industry grow.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to separate in terms of how we make decisions at Pistil, the process of simply being a startup, which always requires, a mix of strategy and tactics and being focused on a vision, but also being flexible and responsive to what's happening around you. So that I think every startup needs to do that. We're doing it within cannabis where our little kind of microclimate in the environment is changing more quickly but you probably say that about a lot of industries too. So we're just trying to, apply the best practices of building a company, listening to customers, being lean, shipping products, focused on shipping out products and features, and building and cultivating a team that's resilient and that is enjoying doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, we think about so many times people are just focused on profit, and it's like, well, without the good people, and yes, there's great automation, but without good people, you really can't go that far. And I think it's the balancing act of, prioritizing what needs to happen, and especially when you're shipping products, getting the feedback, trying to grow, because you also raise capital. And so I'm curious, you probably have investor expectations, financial meetings, you still have to hit all those KPIs. So being able to balance all that as you raised capital, how did that process go for you? Was it the first time you raised capital?
As a individual, as a person, yeah, it's the first time I've done that, and we've done it through multiple rounds. We had an angel round and a seed round, and some other kind of investor input at various times, opportunistically along the way. It's almost a cliche that raising money is hell and that everybody hates it, but I didn't really find it all that bad, to tell you the truth. I think once you sort of know what the game is and what to expect, it's like anything, you just sort of implement the process and do what you're supposed to do and do it as well as you can. And then I think you let the cards fall where they are. Like if you talk to an investor who's not interested in putting money in your company, that's fine. They don't have to do it, and you move on to the next thing, and you try to tell the story as best as you can. I think the approach we've always taken is that the main focus is on the business. And I've been at companies that have really torqued the work in order to please investors. And that can come at kind of the micro level, like let's spend all day working on, this presentation day after day after day. It can come at a higher level where you're like, we really should meet this metric instead of that metric because this metric is going to be perceived positively by an investor. And there's a lot of stuff in between. So what we've done is really tried to focus on the business and be clear that that's what we were doing. And I think what that's done is attracted investors that have that vibe, that really want us to grow a healthy, strong business with long-term prospects. And that's kind of made it less of an onerous situation than I've heard about other people having.
Yeah. Well, because I work with a lot of people that are looking to raise capital, and it seems that, the word on the street is that right now it's not the best time. But also I think that you can boil it down, like, if it's not the best time or it's the best time, let's forget about that and let's think about kind of the process, right? And I think you're right. Like, everything is a process. Sales is a process. Raising
Mm-hmm.
capital is a process. Doing a podcast is a process. I
Mm-hmm.
think what might happen is that there might be not as many educated business savvy people that maybe have a great idea, a great product, even traction, that might not know that process.
Right.
Can you give us, what that process is, or a version of that process? If somebody's listening, wanting, that has a good idea, that has traction, that might not have the process in their playbook.
I think learning that process is available pretty much to anybody with just, I mean, God knows people like to write about raising money on the internet. God, every VC and every person who's raised money is happy to tell you about that process. And I think filtering that in simply by reading, what Y Combinator says, and, listening to podcasts. So the basics are available. Obviously, some of it is contradictory. You need to filter it through. I've been very lucky because I have people that I know, because the advantage of being in the Bay Area and having worked in tech is that I know people personally that can help me and coach me through the process. So that really helps, having a mentor, having somebody that can help you directly and tell you what's bullshit or crazy or reasonable. I think that I think that's super important. I think it's that. I mean, there's also the aspect of, like you say, process. I mean, every conversation you have, in a lot of, for a lot of things that you're trying to achieve, if you have a conversation and you can get more conversations out of that conversation, then the ball keeps rolling. So just kind of some simple things that are applied from other, like finding a job or something, like, hey, thanks for talking to me. Are there two other people that I can talk to that may want to hear about that, and following up and kind of, so
I think you're
it's
right.
learnable. Yeah.
It absolutely is learnable, but I always am curious, like, why. Well, I think there's the concept of, yes, almost everything is available on the internet, right? You need to have the pitch deck. You need to have the story. The pitch deck should be, a certain amount of pages. You need to show that you have an ROI. You want to have a network. But it is interesting, going back to that stat we were talking about, just about, like, not all businesses are going to be successful. Like, what is it that makes certain businesses capital approved and I'm going to invest in you, and others not? And so it was just interesting. I wanted to get your feedback. But I agree. I think network and the story that you're able to tell. And what I liked what you said is that you focus on the business, you attracted those investors. And so when you were even thinking about fundraising, were you thinking about, these are the people that I would want to work with? Because they're your partners. I mean, they're your investors, but they're really are partners in the business. So did you think about it that way as well, of wanting to attract a specific type of individual or individuals or entity that you would prefer working with?
Definitely. I think that we knew we wanted to have relationships that could help us in the cannabis space, in the cannabis industry. Especially when we started, we were, a few people in my garage. And, you always feel like that as a startup, right? You're this, like, very fragile little organism that could die in the sun at any moment, So you want to have connections, you want to have those relationships, and then you want to have expertise. So we did look for cannabis industry relationships, technology, and startup expertise. And that led us to a lot of our great investor partners that have helped us along the way. I mean, I have a conversation with an investor every week, with one investor every week. And so, the other thing as a CEO, one of I think the really tough things about being a CEO is that you don't have a boss. Um, I mean, it sucks to have a boss, but it's also, there's something really
Accountability.
nice. There's really nice, yeah, accountability. And also, yeah, so having somebody that can apply the right type of pressure and can help you sort through priorities is really useful, because that is the role of a boss. And taking out that kind of prioritization, accountability, pressure push, if you can bottle that up in a productive way, it's a really nice thing to have.
Yeah, it really is. I was like, yeah, I think that every founder or entrepreneur needs that, because you can also, I mean, I'm imagining how big is your team now? Like, are you, because you've mentioned you're lean, but
We're about
how
25 folks.
so you're 25 folks. I mean, like, you are the boss, right? You're giving guidance, you're giving all that. And so being able to have somebody or people that you can go to, that you can lean on, it's really important, because you just keeping it all in or putting it on a, project management board, that's not going to get, that will help you, but it's not going to, you need that strategic partner. So I was thinking, yeah, a lot of people are that way. So that's great that you can have that with investors. Okay. So I know vision. I know traction. Where are you planning to go in the next 12 months? Like, what's the game plan?
So we started this year in 2 states with 1 product. In September, we announced that we were in every state, every U.S. state that has a legal market, and we announced 2 new products. So we have a lot of kind of pent up go to market to go to all of these states, to learn those states, to expand to companies that want a business intelligence platform, and then to have conversations with retailers who are completely different bunch, and help them understand how they can use data through Pistil. And things are going really well on that front, but it's like to build the processes in the team behind that go to market now that we have so much more to offer. That's a big part of it. We're expanding to Canada. That's why I'm in Canada today, learning about the market here and meeting with folks. And we're really excited because Canada it's such an interesting market. It's a mature market. And I think they really are going to benefit from what we have to offer. From a technology side, we're increasingly having conversations with customers around giving them data directly. So not through our applications and tools, but through APIs. And those conversations around like how we can provide them data directly to feed into their own tools, their own dashboards, their own work systems, whether it's data or also whether it's services, technology services. One of the things that Pistil has been a really long time on, a lot of work, is taking really messy data and making it clean. And everybody has that problem in cannabis. I mean, if you say, I'll give you a word and you tell me a word goes to your head, you say data, the first thing they're going to say is like frustrating, or they're going to be like messy. And we figured out a way of making data a lot less messy, because we basically built a product catalog for all of cannabis. So working with customers to help them clean their data, provide them data directly, that's a big part of what we're going to be doing next year.
That's so important, because I just think about like the books of so many cannabis operators, like the accounting records, and like what feeds into that. Well, the sales systems and the inventory systems, and being able to solve that problem, hopefully it will help a lot of people, because then they can actually focus on products that are selling and working and truly grow. You've got a lot in store. It's exciting.
Thank you.
Before you wrap up, anything else you want to share? Like, I mean, like, you just have so much. I'm like, what other questions did I not ask you about market trends or data that you find would be beneficial for people on the podcast?
I do want to go back to one thing that you said earlier. I forget what context you were talking about. Oh, I think we were talking about innovation, and you were talking about anti-racism work within cannabis. And what struck me when you were saying that was, I think it's really interesting that cannabis is an industry that is being developed with the context of the injustice that came before, and developing as best as we can with all of the countervailing pressures and demands, and everybody wants their own piece of the pie, obviously, but developing the industry with a concerted effort to make sure that things not only are fair, but on balance make things more fair to make up for all of the injustice that's happened before. And I can't think of another industry that has approached the formation of an industry with that type of social perspective. And it's hard, obviously, but I think that when you look at a state like New York and the way that they're rolling out their program, and the way that they've staffed the administration around cannabis, there is a real intention to try to make things right. And I think that's really cool. I think that's a really cool innovation for cannabis. And it would be wonderful if, when other industries were developing, that we also had those same things in mind. What is fair? How do we think about equal access? How do we think about what came before, and how we can acknowledge what came before in making what we're building now the right way to do things? So that makes me feel good about being in this industry because of that.
It really is. And you said it so eloquently. I think that what's nice about this space is that it touches so many other sectors. So hopefully there's like kind of this like ring that I'm visualizing where cannabis is the central ring. And okay, well, now we've had that conversation. You're a tech ally. You've got a finance ally. And I think just as much as consumer education is so important, I make a concerted effort to have conversations with other accountants or CPAs about the cannabis industry, because they're not used to it and they think it's interesting. And I would love to see that as new industries evolve, and there are so many that are happening, that can take place. And I am curious. I think that this was my first industry becoming, leaving corporate. I worked on only in cannabis, besides like all the corporate industries that I worked in. But as an entrepreneur or a startup or a freelancer, however I want to call myself, it's very different. But I learned so much about social justice in cannabis, like going to city council, like lobbying at the federal government, but like learning why it was prohibited and learning about like what truly social equity is. I realized quickly that I learned it all in cannabis. No one ever taught me any of this in any other industry. And it's a very good point. It's like now there's a little bit more awareness, but I think really being in the space and being open to some of these conversations, like we really do have, we're lucky to be in this, but we need to spread that out quickly to other spaces.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we'll be in touch. Like I'm excited just to follow up and see how everything goes. It seems
wonderful.
Like, you're making a lot of traction and very busy.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. And
thanks so much for listening to this week's show. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed this, leave us a 5-star review. Make sure that you share this episode on your social media and tag us in the Instagram stories. You can find us wherever you go on social media. Just look up Cannabis Business Minds. Have an idea for the show or something that you want to talk about? Shoot us an email at podcast@cannabisbusinessminds.com.